problem into someone else's without having to consider, well, there is an impact. And I don't know how much it goes on, but I've heard any number of comments over the years that it does go on. And when you say put people in for a signature, I commend you and the council for considering that. I think that's a worthwhile approach. The one area, though, that I want to ask you about is over the years, there have been questions about staffing and staffing levels. And I hear comments repeatedly about a span of control ratio, command staff to staff, and even first-line supervisors to staff to make sure that we have the most effective and efficient use of that resource. As you well know, and you said it quite adroitly, it's an important function, but it's a resource-rich consumer, and we have to balance that. And I understand your need for supporting the detention facility and the potential expansion, but I would feel, I hope there's some consideration to look at that seriously. You weren't included, or the sheriff was not included in the matrix study, so, but that's not unusual. I just hope that is something that you'll be able to consider and develop, because it's expensive.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Commissioner, you're absolutely right. Well, in fact, we had one study done by our auditors, and when Tom came in, he's actually done another staffing study. We're trying to make sure that what we're doing, span of control is a huge issue. And I think if we're lacking anywhere, I mean, you guys have done a really good job of helping us. We're at full staff. And our turnover rate is low. We're trying to keep good quality employees. A lot of the departments aren't. I mean, I look at Wichita, they're like 80 down, and they just hired 15 to 18 officers. Our recruiting has been unbelievable, and you all helped us with that. And we brought in county HR. They helped us actually do some market-based studies, and it made things better. It's helped us a ton. I mean, they've been a huge, huge resource for us, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I mean, we wouldn't be where we're at if they weren't with us.
Well, and I'll ask this question of Mr. Newby. I apologize, Mr. Neufeld.
Thud.
That may be worth a warrant.
Sheriff, I called Doug up here.
If I could be allowed to rescind and restate
Previous
comment.
It's been a long day.
Mr. Neufeld, it was back in the late aughts, 2010, where average daily populations were at or about what we're projecting for the next couple of years. I'd be interested in what our staffing costs were for detention, FTE's costs compared to what they are now, and is it about the same? Do we have fewer FTEs, or are we back to where we were? I'm just wondering if that's available.
That's what I wanted earlier today. I'd like to have that 10-year look back.
Well, and I will clarify. If we're talking about jail operations, that's a subset. We talked earlier today about FTEs by department, and that information's available. We keep that on a spreadsheet. The work there will be to explain consolidations and transfers and whatnot. With regard to the jail, there's budgeted and actual FTEs, and I would remind the board that at the onset of the recession, the ADB numbers were not going up, and so we were actually able to reduce some budgeted FTEs that were not filled. So getting to those numbers with the sheriff would be a subset of his departmental numbers, and we would have to do a little work to look at actual versus budgeted, because they were running a number of vacancies that were then a part of how we balance those budgets during the recession.
Plus
So
overtime
we can take a stab at it, but it's going to look a little different than the first one.
Let me expand on that. As I recall, when the new jail was built, we were at, what, 1,100 potential residents? And so the budgets being built up to that point included more FTEs for the jail. And so we were at this level, but the population was still down here. So when the recession hit, these FTEs up here that were not needed were pulled out of the budget completely. And that was one of the big numbers that saved us. So you'll have to make an adjustment there in order to get a true sense of what the last 10 years has looked like.
We can try to tackle that. It's gonna have some pieces, and it won't be the sheriff's total budget. It'll be the detention, and we'll probably look at both budgeted and actually utilized FTEs, which will require a little bit more work. We'll have to kind of back into some of those numbers.
We had a lot of nuances to it because we were farming out inmates then, we had a higher count.
And that's a fair point.
Yeah.
But we're happy to tackle it. It's just gonna look a little different than the other one.
So I have the 2018 Sheriff's Audit Report, and I'm just wondering where you are in following through. One of them, it said the Sheriff's Office plans to work with Treasury and Financial Management to determine the position numbers. Is it on? There it is, okay. The Sheriff's Office plan to work with Treasury and Financial Management to determine if the position number can be added to the accrual leave usage. It also talks about monitoring military deployment, unpaid leave. So where are you on some of these, so we have a better track, you know, of hourly and leave and how, so, I mean, and then it also says that an audit is needed with every 2 to 3 years, given the increasing numbers.
I'll tell you, Commissioner Fast, I'm glad you asked that because in years past, we had some bad experience with audit, but we had none of that this year, or the last year we did it, and it's my pleasure to report that we have complied with every aspect of those audits, and we are fully functioning in everything they ask us to do, and they were very, very helpful. I mean, those audits were, it was really a good, positive experience. It wasn't a gotcha type deal. It was, you need to do this, this, and this, and it was educational for both of us.
Okay, all right, other questions? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff, on one of the items that was not funded, I'm never looking for opportunities to spend money. I'm tight like that. We've met. But can you tell me what impact does it have? You requested 1 FTE for a jail sergeant that was not funded. What impact does that have in the jail?
It's span of control. We try to, you know, the jail's a closed environment, and we try to keep our span of control, which is the number of subordinates to a supervisor. In a perfect world, it would be between 5 and 7 to 1 sergeant. And we try to do that. In the jail, we've got a much larger one, but we have found that we are low on our number of sergeants. So that was an attempt to try to close that gap without asking for too much at once. We're several down as far as sergeants go, but because it's a closed environment, we kind of get by with it. But it's one of those things that we, in the audit too, we kind of noticed it, that our span of control is stretched pretty thin. But we want to make sure that we're trying to ask for that position to kind of shore it up a little bit.
So does it put your staff at the jail, does it put them in any kind of a compromised position without that position filled?
No, it's not a dangerous situation. It's more of consistency with supervision.
Okay.
That's what we were trying to come to.
So we can live without it. We can get by without that. We can make that work.
We can live without it. We're trying to be team players with everybody.
I appreciate that. I just don't want to find us in a position of eliminating something that could cause someone to be harmed or hurt at a later date.
You betcha, and we won't put any of our officers in danger.
Thank you.
Ms. Hanslick?
Yes, Sheriff, I had a question. As we're thinking about the future and the possibility of continuing increase in ADP, do you have any insight or expectation of new technologies or new behavioral methods that might mitigate the need for more staff people, even if we have a higher ADP?
You know, those are conversations, Commissioner, we have to have. You know, if we eliminated our mental health clients, we'd have 30% more room. Those are things that we need to come up with solutions for. There are a lot of different ideas out there. There's conversations that need to be talked with Robert Sullivan about, instead of housing them in our jail, that maybe we could put them over in corrections, because they can do it a little less expensive. And they could still work and still have a work release program. We need to have open conversations, and that's why CJAC is so important. We can have those conversations with all of our stakeholders and look at different ideas and what works and what doesn't. We have to be looking at those things. You know, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job if we can. I mean, nobody wants people to be in jail. But if we can find alternative methods that work and we can show real progress, I think we should consider all of them. But those conversations have to happen. And if we don't, then I think we're doing our citizens a disservice. You know, we've looked at a lot of different things. Mental health is, I mean, if I wanted to close down a jail right now, if I could eliminate drug and alcohol abuse and mental health, we wouldn't need jails. It's that simple. And the guys that go in there and talk to them will tell you that. Most of the mistakes people make are due to those two things. And if we could get a handle on that, man, we'd be in good shape.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I think what part of what I'm thinking about is even if we don't eliminate the population or reduce it, are there methods to better oversee the population that's in there without as many staff? Like I'm thinking about, I know Johnson County has been a leader in implementing trauma-informed care practices that have been used throughout the country to help with incarcerated folks and make it easier to work with them by training staff in those methods. So I'm thinking about those kinds of things, or even technology that allows better monitoring within a jail without as many staff. So I'm not asking you to respond to all of those today, but my hope would be we may be able to look at not as much staffing needs if those kinds of opportunities continue to develop.
Absolutely, you know, and it used to be when I first started in the jail, we just locked 16 of them in a room and hoped for the best. Then we went to 48 of them in individual modules. Now we do 8 of them in a room, which is not a really good plan to do it. I don't care if we locked eight of any of us in with 2 bathrooms next to our head, it's not going to be good. So that's what happens, you know. So there are different ways we can do things. We've got open bay. We've tried a lot of different ways, but the key for me is it's got to be safe for our officers and safe for the people we keep in jail, because somebody loves them.
And I just want to say I had the opportunity through the Citizens Academy to tour the jail. I've both the one over here across the street and the one down at New Century, and was very impressed with the staff there and with the facility. So thank you for that.
Well, and you know, it's a philosophy with our staff that these people are going to get out. Somebody loves them. We want them to leave better than when they came in, and they run a great jail. They really do. I'll stack it against any jail in the country.
Thank you.
Ms. Fast, did you have?
Yeah, and it's, you know, your jail deputy salaries, I mean, wow. I mean, that's way higher than what your average police salary is in many of the cities in Johnson County. I guess, why are they so much higher than an average front patrol person in Johnson County? To me, is there any way that we could have steps on those deputies? You have deputy aides. I mean, that's just a very high-level salary, and compared to what they make in our state prisons, too. So
I'll
I can see
give
why
you
you
that.
don't have much turnover, because we're the highest-paid job in the state. right
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think.
Please don't compare us to the state prison
Yeah,
system.
please
Well,
don't.
it doesn't take, but I'm saying about other counties. Are there counties with those comparable
In-
salaries?
Included in here, just so you know, and I'll let the sheriff speak, also included in here is KPF, which is a lot of, all the benefits are included in here, health insurance. This is the full cost of the
I
position.
understand you take 30% away, and you're still higher than your
It might be
average
more,
police salary.
we'll have to look at that. It might even be more than that with the
Yeah,
KPF.
KPF's quite a bit higher than
Yeah.
Capers, so with that and health insurance, it's a
I
higher.
just know what we
Right.
budget at the city levels for all the northeast cities and even the larger cities.
One of the things that, Commissioner Fast, that we've done is, if we did a survey, and which we did, I asked them to do a survey regionally. And if you do it through the state of Kansas, there are sheriffs in western Kansas that make $36,000 a year and got 3 deputies. And their deputies don't make $15 an hour, some lower than that. So if you look at that, that's not a fair analysis. What we looked at were counties of 500,000 or more, Hennepin County, Minnesota, Jefferson County, Colorado, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, that have full service sheriff's offices. And we tried to get a barometer of what a good pay scale is, not the top, not the bottom. And HR did an outstanding analysis on it. And we're really not paid. I mean, if you look at the Lenexes, you look at Overland Park, Olathe, we're pretty much in line with them. Now, there are cities in our county that don't make as much, but they're much smaller departments generally. So we try to be fair in what we pay, but then again, you get what you pay for. And that was a quote from Fred Allenbrand. One of the things we do differently.
Is there any sort of like paraprofessionals, like, teachers have paraprofessionals, nurse aides, LPNs? Is there any sort of tier? I mean, I have no idea about the jail deputy world.
I'll tell you, teachers are underpaid too.
Well, I will totally agree with that.
But what we've
our
done
social workers.
is, when you look at our department, we're a little over 500. Our officers are certified, trained police officers. If you go to Wichita, I said they're 88 down, they are not certified officers, they're not Kansas Police and Fire, they're not career-oriented. They got a turnover rate about 25%, and they're constantly trying to hire people. In the long run, by paying a better salary, you're saving money because you keep people, you're not constantly training, and you've got professionals running it. And the big thing in jails, they sue you for everything. What we want to do is keep those lawsuits down to minimal, and that keeps everybody in the black. You really do. We by having professionals there and keeping a good salary, in the long run, I think we save the taxpayers of Johnson County money.
Yeah, I would agree. Following what happens in Sedgwick County, in the newspaper down there, they can continuously have issues in their county jail. No question about it.
Well, Kansas City, Missouri, look at their problems.
Yeah.
We don't want to get there.
Yeah. Excuse me, Mr. Allen.
Becky, we went through several years through the budget when the jail was not fully staffed. We had multi-million-dollar overtime expenses. So being fully staffed, and one of the things to the credit of the sheriff, that salary analysis and adjustment. So with the major cities here, we had to be competitive, but long run, having a fully staffed sheriff's department, not incurring substantial overtime cost, and having it professionally run. And I'm going to agree, just all the things that are going on in Jackson County and what's going on in Sedgwick County, having full-time professional officers in there. And initially, I kind of thought the same thing, is can we go a different route? But being here the number of years, I'm fully understanding you pay for what you get, and our jails operate very efficiently, so.
And we've civilianized a lot of our positions that don't have contact with inmates.
Well, and that's what the previous audit said. It said, it recommended that we need to look at have more civilian, and so that you have more of a tier. I mean, I think this is a discussion, as we increase more pods, that we're gonna have to look what positions can we have more civilians.
And we've got over 100 90, I think, civilians now. Or no, close to 100, I'm sorry. And they operate our control centers, and, you know, we're looking at all kinds of options to bring people in, young people in for career paths, because that's what we want. We want a career path. But again, if something happens and goes south in Johnson County, particularly with our smaller cities at the northeast end, if they don't have the resources to handle something, we're their backup. And if they need it, we're coming. And that's a huge, huge peace of mind, I hope, for the citizens of our county.
Ms. Hanslick, did you have?
Yes, and I would follow up with that. I am frequently asked about that in my district about the sheriff's budget, because it is the largest portion of the county budget. And it might be helpful to me if I could have a copy of that salary study, just so I can speak to that more knowledgeably. But I do think having as much transparency and as much information out there as possible to the public would be very, very helpful, and because I think those questions do remain out there.
Sure they do. And, you know, that's what we're all about, transparency. I mean, everything we do needs to be transparent in the open and in the light, and anything we can produce, we'll produce.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'd like to see a copy of that if it's possible. Thank you.
You know, I would say this, it's good conversation. As Mr. Allen indicated, it's conversation we've had before. And at least in my experience, we've gone through a couple of evaluations regarding staffing and costs, and how we could save costs. But I would agree with Mr. Allen. I was one of those early on who felt that we didn't really have a need for professional, full-service officers in the jail. But having given a couple of depositions in regards to situations that occurred in the jail, I've come completely around. We need those professional officers in the jail, and we should not rely upon civilians, or we would be giving a lot more depositions. Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on, right? Okay, sorry. I respect the fact that we have looked at this historically, but I would also say it doesn't hurt us to reconsider this from time to time, as the sheriff has pointed out, and audit every 2 or 3 years. New eyes, the world changes, other opportunities present themselves. What I'm hearing from the sheriff is, at least generally, he's open to that. I don't have a solution, but I would say just because we looked at it in the past and it did or didn't work, always reconsider it. Yeah. And I would follow on to the, you listed comparables for salaries. That makes a lot of sense because we compete not just locally, but regionally, maybe even nationally for some positions. I would go back, though, to something I said earlier. I would find it very informative to have comparables in terms of span of control and executive level positions to direct work level positions, the command staff's structure and costs. Good people there, but there's an ongoing expense, and I just want to make sure that we can satisfy ourselves that we're doing everything we can. And I know, Sheriff, that's your mantra, and I respect that.
And you're absolutely right. The personnel research that we've had done so far has come out that we're actually low. So I'm open to anything we want to do. So I think that our staff is very, very conservative. We try not to spend more than we need to. We're very cognizant of being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. And to date, all the staffing studies we've had have actually showed us low. So we're open to anything. So we're trying to do the best we can do. But, you know, conversations are not a bad thing. There's always ways of
I mean,
looking at
when
things.
This is the largest part of our budget. I owe this to my tax-paying residents in my district, that we look at this, and with it going up, with opening another pod, increasing daily fees on the cities, I owe this to the elected officials who've asked me, and the residents who are paying these taxes.
Yeah. Conversation is never an issue, but,
The chairman.
but I would go back, what has happened in the Jackson County Jail
It's terrible.
should be an eye-opener and a persuasive argument to anyone who really wants to think about the issue seriously. We don't want that,
No, we do not.
so.
And everything we try to do, Mr. Chairman, is to be, you know, we work for the citizens of this county, and everything we do should be subject to sunlight. And if you want to see it, we'll produce it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't,
Any-
it's not, Jackson County is long-time management, it's housing, there's multiple, it's defunding. I just don't think that's, to my friends who are Jackson County legislators, it's not really fair to them, because it's been a long-time systematic
The
issue.
jail is not staffed by uniform officers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do not have
difference.
uniform officers in the
Uniform
jail.
Well, you end up with inmates watching inmates. It's unfortunate.
Okay. Any other questions? Discussion? All right, Sheriff, thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's pretty painful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One to go.
This should be-
You can stick around if you want. You don't have to leave.
I heard he was giving us a couple $1 million.
Oh, we might want to hang around now. Wait a second.
Okay, we're going to quickly go through the information on the courts, Robin and I are. If you look at the mission statement, it really covers a listing on the court's jurisdiction over civil and criminal cases in Johnson County. And then at the end, it gets to the intent, which is to create a court environment for the public, respecting the community, and really then focuses on customer and public services, impartiality and accessibility, which are fundamentally important, obviously, with the court system. The key points to consider as we go through this presentation is Veterans Treatment Coordinator Court. There is a position that is now unfunded, so that is, excuse me, a key point and focus of the budget presentation. We also have pretrial supervision fees. They're statutorily limited at $15 a week, and so the revenue to staff costing ratio is now negative. In terms of pretrial supervision numbers, we're seeing the caseload numbers up by 13%, and that's created staffing issues. So Robin will go through the numbers, and then we can get into the conversation.
All right, the budget for district courts for 2020 is $6.45 million. However, I did want to point out, you see a dip in the 2019 expenditures for 2019. There was actually a small error that occurred in our budget management system where it eliminated 6 fee-funded FTEs for the 2019 budget. So those are back in for 2020. It's just you see that dip and then the increase. And so there's a possibility we may need to come back at the end of this year and ask for additional authority, but again, it doesn't affect tax support, it's just fee-supported positions. So I just wanted to explain that dip. It really is a steady expenditure for district courts for 2019. And so there is no loss in that right there. And that's, again, also where you see the budgeted FTEs. We wanted it matches up with our budget, but again, those 66 FTEs drop and then come back. The other increase that we have is CASA for $50,000, which was a funded RAR. As Scott mentioned, the RAR's Veterans Treatment Court Coordinator, this was actually a grant-funded FTE, and that has gone away. And so instead of funding the full position, we're actually giving the district courts, what's included in the proposed budget is $50,000 of contractual funding. And then the request is for them to go to the State of Kansas Office of Judicial Administration to create a position that the county would help fund with contractual dollars. This is only the salary amount and not the benefits. Again, as I mentioned, the cost of contractual services is included for $50,000. And then equipment reserve increase, again, they asked for this ongoing, but due to funding constraints, we can only fund it one time, so you'll probably see this again in the future. Unfunded requests, they have pretrial supervision personnel for 2 FTE moving from fee to county funding due to loss of fee revenue, an interpreter for $75,000, and then an increase to the magistrate supplement of $20,000 for 4 magistrate judges. I'll turn it over for any questions that you may have.
Questions, the magistrate judges, that's a $20,000 item. They handle a very, very high volume of caseloads. Am I right? It seemed to me like a $5,000 salary increase for a total of $20,000 is warranted, if for no other reason than the volume that they. Could you explain to us the activities of the magistrate judges?
Certainly, Chairman. The magistrates are essentially our high-volume docket judges. They handle the majority of misdemeanor cases. So all of your traffic protections from abuse and stalking that are not already related to an existing family court case. They'll do all of the small claims, the limited actions. We have a magistrate that handles all of our first appearances, and that's something that came about where you want to make sure that you have consistency for all that are entering the system. So by having a dedicated judge to handle first appearances, you have much more consistency in what your bonds will be set out, the use of different services. So they are very busy judges, and if I can scroll down fast enough, I could get you some specific numbers. But our magistrates, I think it here, magistrates handle approximately 33,500 of the cases that are filed annually in the court. So they are just always very busy with what they do.
Could you explain for us, and especially the new members, we fund the magistrate judges, and the reason for that, the relationship between those positions, the state and the county?
Certainly. So the magistrates get a base pay that's the same across the state, and it's just in the low 60s. And that's because in other parts of the state, the magistrates are not, they do not have to be attorneys. And in order, way before me, I'm told that the history is that in order to ensure that Johnson County would have law-trained magistrate judges, the supplement was created in order to encourage a higher pool of candidate, a better candidate to serve as our magistrate judges.
And so our support has put the magistrate salaries in relation to the district court judges where? Equal or slightly below, or?
I believe with salary, it's around 92, so that's still, I'm trying to factor in those 2.5% raises. It's
still less
It's about
than
20, it's more than 20,000, it's just under 30,000 less.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think I'll put that on my
I would agree
revisit.
that that's 5,000 a judge. That seems reasonable to move that.
Yeah, for magistrates, so.
I had it on my list already.
They will be very happy
Mr.
for me to
Ashcraft.
report that conversation back to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Stocks, if you did, I missed it. Would you introduce the one?
We did
please?
not. We skipped the formal. I'm Catherine Stocks, Court Administrator, Laura Brewer, Chief Court Services Officer, and then today we have with us Amy Boydston, the Director of CASA, who is not going to present formal information, but would like to say thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome, Mr. Brewer. I take it this is your first time before us. If not, then I don't remember you, but thank you for being here. So, very good. The question I had, and Ms. Stocks, I've asked this question of others. I try to get a sense of how we measure success in these efforts, and I just don't see much here other than kind of some generalities. I mean, how do you know, how do you know the judges are doing anything?
I actually have really good news for you. So as part of the court's strategic planning process that we went through in 2018, it was a 6-month strategic, hold on.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You really can't? Is that better?
If you would, I can't
Okay,
hear you.
so
Ms.
as,
Fast was enjoying kicking me too much, so
okay. Is it safe to talk now?
please,
Go ahead.
Okay.
start again.
As part of the court's 6-month strategic planning process that we went through in 2018, which was through a $55,000 grant from the State Justice Institute, we did court employee performance and engagement surveys and created our 2019 through 2021 strategic plan. That is mentioned in the county's annual report, where we have specific priorities for the courts. Well, one of them is to bring formalized performance measures based off of core tools from the National Center for State Courts. We had a 2.5-day intensive training related to how performance measures can actually be applied. And so we're in the process of working with our judges and with the GEMS department to pull the data in a way that then will provide the courts performance measures that are based off of national standards.
Very good. And I think you had mentioned to me that you were working on a strategic plan. I had forgotten that salient point, but I do appreciate the effort because it's not here, so.
Yes, it will be.
Yeah.
I would like to promise it for next year.
Well, to that point, I don't think we should understand that the district court judges are provided by the state, and certain activities, supporting those activities are state obligations. Our obligations are in some levels of support staff, the magistrates, and other activities. So the district court judges, you can ask Superior or Supreme Court Justice what his evaluation is. We don't have a financial obligation to the district court judges.
No, Mr. Chairman, we may not, but we do have an obligation to the citizens of Johnson County, and I think it's a fair consideration for us to reflect upon. And along those lines, I would be interested because we're talking about salary bumps for some of these magistrates, and there's a logic to that, but I'd be interested in that longer-term look, because if you look at the high volumes that they've had over the last 10 years or so, they're not up to the high marks for traffic and limited actions that they had 10 years ago. And I think we've added judges in addition to increasing their salary. And I'm just wondering, are they doing really more work per judge now, or about the same, or?
So actually, the scope, the statutory scope of the magistrate has expanded where they're taking on more cases. Court decisions made by magistrates now are appealed directly to the Court of Appeals instead of just to straight up to a district judge. And as far as you're talking about the 10-year trend in case filings, yes, there is an ebb and flow based on that. And as has been said, traffic is way up. The Highway Patrol has more officers dedicated to traffic now, which the district attorney may or may not have said this morning. I did not see his. So that has a residual impact, but you're correct about that. However, protections from abuse and stalking, we have also implemented, and the magistrates are handling, we already had a successful mediation program for limited actions, that kind of thing. We're trying to find more ways to resolve conflict instead of just pushing everybody through the system. So the strain on both the support staff and the judges, when you're trying to spend more time per case to make sure that the outcome keeps people from coming back, especially in civil disputes, those type of things, I can't give you the information today, but that's part of this performance measure process of not only just looking at your case filing numbers, but you need to look at the average time per type of case. You need to look at your outliers and move those out of that system. So it's not just based on that. It's also, do we have the ability and the resources to be able to dispose of as many cases as are filed that year? And when you see the strain on the district attorney's office and the public defender's office, you can see the strain on our courts because you have a lot more continuances because there's not enough staff. So it looks like judges aren't clearing cases when in reality, you're being forced to have more continuances and you're spending more time on administrative tasks, and we're not using our judges to their highest potential if we don't have all the resources dedicated to operating our courts.
And you make the salient point of having outcome measures to track that, which we don't have. And it still goes back to the point of trying to understand what the ebb and flow is, because I would agree in the last few years it has, I'm gonna say creeped up. I mean, it has escalated. But longer term, in terms of court operations, DA operations, even sheriff operations, trying to get an understanding of the resources that we have committed, what has happened to them, and you've outlined several in your case, but what has happened, what is the impact, and have they been reapplied elsewhere, maybe productively, maybe not, but I don't have any way of seeing that and understanding that, not to any level near yours.
Right, so that's where it's easier for us to track things like pretrial, because we can show the direct impact on that, because you can look at the caseloads versus the number of staff and the need to bring more people in. Those are easier for us to quantify, and why we have been able to predict that we would have a drain on our funds and need resources in the future, because someone like Laura here is able to really focus on those kind of numbers and provide that information.
And those are fair indicators, I'm sure. So I'm sure Mr. Tanner Fortney will be visiting with you to some degree, or if not Tanner, someone, let Maury do it.
Mr. Allen?
Just one quick question, and I know in the past, the state employees that work in the courthouse, this 2.5% raise, are they participating in that also, or do you know?
Yes, it was after 6 rounds of conference committee. The market raises were scrapped based off of the Senate's position, and it became a flat 2.5% for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hanslick?
Yes, I had 3 questions, Ms. Stocks. First of all, in terms of the Veterans Treatment Court, which I think is a fantastic program, has there been any more discussion of expanding to include maybe a mental health court or drug court?
Yes. One of the reasons that we wanted to get that position out from under the grant authority was because currently under the BJA grant that we're working under, our employee who is here, Adam is here, this is our Veterans Treatment Court Coordinator, Adam Baker. Adam can only work with Veterans Treatment Court. We would like to expand the duties of his position to be a treatment court coordinator for other treatment courts. We already have an existing juvenile pre-adjudication drug court. Judge Foster would like to expand that to a post-adjudication drug court. He's moving fairly quickly on that. I anticipate that happening in the next few months. There's also a planning committee currently meeting for adult drug court as well. I really think that treatment courts are definitely the wave of the future, and that's where things are headed. And it would be very nice to have a position dedicated to the coordination of multi-treatment courts.
And I wonder if the expansion of those courts might also impact what we just heard from the sheriff about the increasing number of people in jails. So that might be something to consider from a cost perspective. So thank you for that. My second question has to do with, I saw that one of the unfunded requests is interpreter, and having spent a lot of time over at the courthouse working with victims of domestic violence, it seems like there were never enough interpreters. So I'm a little concerned about that, and maybe you could tell me a little more about the need for the request for the interpreter.
Certainly. The reason we had done this is that we have had a great relationship with the county for years, where our current interpreting coordinator, Michael Henneke, his position is almost, I think, about a decade old. I'm 75% sure on that. Well, he's been around for quite a long time. And then when I came in 2015, we started having discussions with the county manager's office about how much time he was spending on administrative functions. And the reality is that he needs to be in the courtroom. And so we were able to get an additional FTE. And the way that position was funded was, Dave, where's Dave? I do not believe it was through shifting of fees from our statutory fees up into our personnel. Is that correct?
That's
That it was
correct. Yeah,
just
we could
additional?
look to do that. I mean, I think the needs are being covered through contract. So you're talking about shifting from contract to personal services, and
Right.
adding a person for that.
So that was part of our discussion with the position review, PRC, was that we need the services, and it's really hard for us to predict with the data that we currently have. We're working to get more refined information. It's hard to just say an interpreter event, because that can be a quick hearing or that could be all day. And from you especially understand that if on the fly we need an interpreter for a protection from abuse, that can be 4 hours. So it's really hard to just automatically guarantee, well, if we get this position, we're not going to see an impact in our statutory fees. I don't want to guarantee that we would then spend less on contract interpreters, because especially this year, we have had we're way up on jury trials this year overall, but they've also required interpreters, which requires multiple interpreters per day, because you can't have one person doing simultaneous interpretation without a break. So we have those ebbs and flows, and I don't want to make a promise that then we have to come back later and say, well, actually, we really did need those contractors. So that's why we were in a tricky situation. We would appreciate any more FTEs dedicated to interpreters, because we don't just serve the courts. We serve the district attorney. We handle protections from abuse. We help the victim's advocate. This serves court services. This serves anyone in the courthouse that's a member of the public that might need assistance. Our interpreters can get pulled aside. So there's a broader scope. It's not just serving the courts on this one.
Thank you. My last question probably is more for Amy. I didn't see anywhere an explanation with the additional $50,000, what your plan is, how you're going to use that, and maybe some statistics as to how the caseloads have increased. Maybe you could just provide a little more explanation for that, please.
Sure. Well, as the note on the key points mentioned, this has been a longstanding relationship between the county and CASA. I think on there it notes that since 2000, there's been level funding. We were actually able to dig back into our archives and found out that this contract and this agreed amount has not changed in 25 years, since 1996. So this would be the first sustainable increase. There was a 1-year bump of $20,000, I think, back in 2008, and then that was eliminated. So to be honest with you, I don't know if that was a special project that was just meant to be one time. But over the period of the last 5 years, we've seen a 36% increase in the number of cases that we're serving for Johnson County. I think a lot of that is listening to the sheriff's presentation about the increase in drug arrests. We see a significant amount of kids entering the juvenile court system due to abuse and neglect, and oftentimes due to parental substance abuse. In the last year, we served all-time high numbers in the number of children in Johnson County that we're serving, 411. In 2008, we provided, I think, 584 reports to the district courts regarding those cases. And in terms of proposed funding plans for 2020, we are still putting together, it's very early for us to put together our budget for next year, but we have noted that.
Lucky you.
Yes. But we have noted that we are getting close to a saturation point in terms of the number of advocates that we can supervise with our existing staff. So we are looking for resources to potentially expand our direct service and our case supervision staff. We are also, and Commissioner, as you know, many local charities and not-for-profit organizations are also preparing for information we've received from individual donors and also United Way that we should expect less allocations in future years due to various factors. So we're looking to make sure that we can stabilize our budget so that we can continue to serve as many cases for the county courts as possible.
Great. Well, thank you. That's very, very thorough and very helpful. So this would be basically undesignated funds for you to use to support
Yes, those
your
funds
services.
historically have come to us unrestricted, which is very helpful because it allows us then to shift it to where we have the greatest need.
Yes. Well, thank you. That was very, very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also I appreciate what you do.
Thanks.
I want to go back to the interpreter question. I just had one, let's say hiring one individual versus being able to contract out as the need occurs. I can envision there are multiple languages that need to be addressed.
Right.
And one person could have multiple, I guess, languages that they could speak, but
My understanding
Seemed to
on,
me like if you go out and contract for what you need, does that put you in a better position than having one person who might have limited language ability?
So that's a really good question. We currently have a pool of dedicated Spanish contract interpreters because there's so much demand. So they know that they will get work, and we pay them a lower rate than a standard interpreter that we pay for other languages because we're able to guarantee the work. However, when you look at the total amount, when you look at pay and benefits, if you're paying someone, for example, $50 an hour, are you able to pay an FTE with benefits total less than $50 per hour? And then have that person on call at all times, 8 to 5, so that you can
But
guarantee.
my question is, would that FTE have the full range of language skills that you need? It seemed like their language skill range would be fairly limited, so you'd still have to contract.
Correct, but I don't want to get it wrong. It's over 90% of our interpretation events are in Spanish. Now, we serve over 30 different languages, but oftentimes it's a few times a year that we'll use an interpreter for a specific language. So it would be difficult to try to retain someone, for instance, in Tagalog, right? So that doesn't happen. It does happen regularly enough that we know those interpreters. However, it would be difficult for us to bring in another language. If we did an analysis and found there is a very specific language that we could substantiate a different type of FTE that wasn't related to Spanish, we would bring that to you. But I'm pretty confident that it is rare enough and varied enough that the economies of scale are not there other than to pay them for those specific instances.
Other questions? Ms. Fast?
I just want to say, my office, my other job is with Shawnee County CASA, and I see every day, I mean, every dollar you give to them helps like about 10 volunteers. I mean, most of their services is volunteer. So we're providing funding so that you can increase their volunteer services to do the cases. And since 2010, I just looked up, I mean, Johnson County in 2010 had 374 out-of-home placements, and now we're like at 570. So we're about doubled. The number of children in foster care now is almost 8,000. 2010, we were in the 5,000 range. So, I mean, we're seeing it in the numbers that you're working with every day. And your numbers of the need is just doubled just in 8 years.
Okay. All right, other questions? Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it for today. I would remind the board that next week we're currently scheduled at 1. I haven't looked at what the possibility of moving that up is. I think the agenda review today was fairly light, wasn't it?
We'll know more tomorrow after staff agenda review
Yeah.
for the following week.
So we'll just keep an eye on the possibilities. Next week is Health and Human Services. We also have Records and Taxation, and then the remaining Central Services, BOCC, CMO Audit, and those kinds of folks. So it's kind of in 3 different distinct sections. And I would say that we have reasonable flexibility. I think we have really a governing board with JCDS. Most of the rest are staff, so we should have pretty good flexibility schedule-wise next week.
Mr. Ashcraft?
So when will we get the material and the presentation? Will we get the material tomorrow? Like a
Tuesday.
book with all the...
We'll publish it on Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Huh?
Tuesday. We'll publish it Tuesday.
Tuesday? Okay.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all very much for your patience this afternoon, and for those who were making the presentations, again, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We are adjourned.